Henry Louis Wallace was born on November 1965 in Barnwell, South Carolina, to Lottie Mae Wallace, a single mom. The house that Wallace grew up in, he lived there with his older sister by 3 years, his mother, and his great grandma. And they were said to be so poor that they did not even have plumbing or electricity. Lottie Mae was a very strict woman. She had very little patience for Henry. She was said to be very verbally abusive and would snap on him for any little thing that he did wrong. It's also said that she did not get along with her mother either, and they argued constantly. And even though Lottie worked a full-time job at a textile mill, they still had very little money, so much so that whenever Henry would outgrow his clothes, he would be given his sister's hand-me-downs to wear. Now, when Lottie felt that her kids needed to be disciplined and she was too tired to do it herself, she would make Wallace and his sister get switches off the tree in the yard and whoop each other. Despite all of that, Henry was very popular at Barnwell High School. He was on the student council, and since his mom would not allow him to play football, he became the only male cheerleader. He enjoyed high school, and pretty much everyone had great things to say about him. But academically, his grades weren't, all there. So he graduated in 1983, and then he attended South Carolina State College for 1 semester. And after that, he decided to work as a DJ at a local radio station. But unfortunately, his radio career would be short-lived because he was fired after caught stealing some of the CDs. So with nothing holding him really in Barnwell, he decided to join the Navy. And by all accounts, he did what he was told to do, and he was pretty good as a naval officer. In 1985, he married his high school sweetheart, Moretta Brabham. So in addition to becoming a husband, he also took on the role of being a stepfather to her daughter. Now, not long after he was married, he started using drugs, and his drug of choice was crack cocaine. So to pay for his drug habit, he started burglarizing homes and businesses. Now, while he was stationed in Washington, he was served with burglary warrants for crimes in the Seattle metro area. In January of 1988, he was arrested for breaking into a hardware store, and he later pled guilty to a charge of second-degree burglary. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of supervised probation, but according to his probation officer, he blew off most of the mandatory meetings. In February of 1991, Wallace broke into his old high school and the radio station where he once worked. He stole video and recording equipment and was caught trying to pawn them. In 1992, he was arrested for breaking and entering again. Now, due to his near-perfect military record, he managed to get an honorable discharge from the Navy when his criminal activity started, getting in the way. But basically, the Navy was like, yeah, we're done with you. Bye. Shortly after that, his wife also left him. In November of that year, he relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he found work at several fast food restaurants. That would also be where his killing spree would begin. In early 1990, Wallace took the life of Tashonda Bethia in his hometown of Barnwell, and then he dumped her body in a lake. Her body was not discovered until weeks later. Now, Wallace was questioned by police regarding her disappearance, but he was never formally charged. He was also questioned in connection with the attempted assault of another 16-year-old girl, but he was not charged then either. In May 1992, he picked up Sharon Nance, who was a convicted drug dealer and prostitute, and when she demanded payment for her services, he then beat her to death, and then he dropped her body off by some railroad tracks, and she was found days later. In June of 1992, he sexually assaulted and strangled Caroline Love at her apartment. Then he dumped her body in a wooded area. Now, Caroline was a friend of Wallace's then girlfriend, and after he took her life, he and her sister went to the police and filed a missing persons report to the police. And it would be almost 2 years before her body would ever be discovered. On February 19th of 1993, Wallace strangled Shauna Hawk at her home after first having sexual relations with her, and then he later went to her funeral. Now, Hawk was one of Wallace's co-workers at Taco Bell, where Wallace was her supervisor. On June 22nd, he sexually assaulted and strangled another co-worker named Audrey Spain. Her body was found 2 days later. On August 10th of 1993, Wallace sexually assaulted and strangled Valencia Jumper, a friend of his sister's, and then he attempted to cover up his crime by setting her on fire. A few days after her death, he and his sister went to Valencia's funeral. A month later, in September 1993, he went to the apartment of Michelle Stinson, who was a struggling college student and a single mom of 2 sons. Stinson was also a friend of his from Taco Bell, and he sexually assaulted her, and sometime later he strangled her in front of her oldest son. On February 4th of 1994, Wallace was arrested for shoplifting, but police had not made a connection between him and the murders. So on February 20th of 1994, Wallace strangled Vanessa Little Mack, another Taco Bell employee, in her apartment. Now, Mack had 2 daughters aged 7 and 4 months at the time of her death. On March 8, 1994, Wallace robbed and strangled Betty Jean Baucom. Baucom and Wallace's girlfriend were co-workers. Afterward, he took some things from her house and he left the apartment. He also took her car. Now, he tried to pawn off everything except the car, which he left at a shopping center. Wallace went back to the same apartment complex on the night of March 8, 1994, knowing that a man named Bernice Woods would be at work and that his girlfriend, Brandy June Henderson, would be at home alone. Wallace sexually assaulted Henderson while she held her baby in her arms, and then he strangled her. And he also strangled her son, but luckily the boy survived. Afterward, Wallace took some, valuable items from her apartment, and then he left. Now, the police started to realize that, something was going on, all these women. So they started, getting police officers to patrol a lot more in East Charlotte after so many women were found, and all at the same apartment complex. And even with all of that, Wallace still managed to go under the radar, and he strangled Deborah Ann Slaughter, who had been a co-worker of his girlfriend's. Her body was found on March 12th of 1994. Eventually, Wallace was arrested on March 13th of 1994, and for 12 hours, he confessed to the murders of 10 women. He also went into detail about their appearances, how he had killed them, and that's when he told police about his crack addiction. So over the next 2 years, Wallace's trial would be delayed for a number of reasons, but his trial finally started on September of 1996. On January of 1997, he was found guilty of 9 of the murders, and he was sentenced to 9 death sentences. On June 5th of 1998, Wallace married a former prison nurse by the name of Rebecca Torrijos in a ceremony that was held next to the execution chamber where he had been sentenced to die. Now, since his conviction, Wallace has made several appeals in an attempt to overturn his death sentence, but luckily all of those appeals have been denied.